For 90 years, the Umayyad dynasty had ruled over one of the largest empires the world had ever seen, stretching from the shores of Spain to the borders of India. Yet by the year 750, that empire lay in ruins, its royal family hunted, its capital abandoned. This is the story of how a rival family, claiming descent from the prophet's own household, brought an empire to its knees, not through sheer force alone, but through decades of patience, grievance, and calculated rebellion. To understand how the Abbasids succeeded, we must first understand why the Umayyad had already begun to fail. When the Umayyad dynasty rose to power in 661, it inherited a fledgling Islamic empire and transformed it into a vast, centralized state. But prosperity for the ruling family did not translate into fairness for the empire's subjects. Non-Arab converts to Islam, known as the Mawali, were promised equality under the faith. In practice, they were taxed at rates far higher than Arab Muslims, sometimes losing up to half their harvest to land taxes, while Arab elites paid a fraction of that sum. Persian administrators, Egyptian scholars, and Syrian merchants ran the machinery of empire, yet found the highest offices of power permanently closed to them. Resentment simmered, and it did not simmer alone. 67 years before the Abbasids ever raised their banners, an event took place that would define the moral case against Umayyad rule for generations. In the year 680, at a place called Karbala, Husayn ibn Ali, the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad, was killed by Umayyad forces after refusing to pledge allegiance to a caliphate he considered unjust. His death was not merely a political killing. For millions across the empire, it became a symbol, proof that the Umayyad had abandoned the principles of justice they claimed to uphold. This grievance did not fade. It was retold in poetry, invoked in sermons, and passed down through families who had never forgotten. By the time the Abbasid movement began to organize, the memory of Karbala had already primed a generation to see the Umayyad not as legitimate rulers, but as usurpers. Into this climate of economic frustration and unhealed grief stepped the Abbasid family, descendants of Abbas ibn Abd al-Muttalib, the uncle of the Prophet Muhammad. This lineage mattered enormously. While the Umayyad governed through tribal privilege and military strength, the Abbasids could point to something the Umayyad could not: direct kinship with the Prophet's own household, through Abd al-Muttalib, his grandfather. The Abbasids did not present themselves at first as a new ruling dynasty. They presented themselves as reformers, as the rightful custodians of justice that the Umayyad had forsaken. The movement found its architect in a man named Abu Muslim al-Khurasani, a gifted organizer operating from the province of Khorasan, in what is today northeastern Iran and parts of Central Asia. In June of 747, Abu Muslim raised black banners across the villages of Khorasan, a deliberate symbol of mourning and defiance. Over the following 2 years, he built a coalition that cut across ethnic and tribal lines. Persian converts angered by unjust taxation, Arab tribesmen excluded from power, and devout Muslims who viewed the Umayyad as spiritually corrupt. This was not a spontaneous uprising. It was a carefully constructed alliance, years in the making. Between 747 and 749, the rebellion moved west with increasing momentum. Umayyad garrisons fell one after another, often with minimal resistance, a sign of how little loyalty remained toward the ruling family. In November of 749, rebel forces entered the city of Kufa, in present-day Iraq, a city of deep symbolic importance, long associated with support for the Prophet's family. It was there, in Kufa's central mosque, that the first Abbasid Caliph, Abu al-Abbas al-Safa, was formally proclaimed. The message to the empire was unmistakable: a new order, claiming both moral and hereditary legitimacy, had arrived. The Umayyad Caliph, Marwan II, refused to yield without a fight. He assembled his remaining forces and marched to meet the rebellion near the Great Zab River in northern Iraq. On the 25th of January, 750, the two armies clashed. The outcome was decisive. The Umayyad army, battered by years of defection and declining morale, was routed. Marwan fled south toward Egypt, but was pursued and killed. 90 years of Umayyad rule ended not in negotiation, but in collapse. What followed was severe. The Abbasids moved swiftly to eliminate any possibility of an Umayyad restoration, and members of the royal family were hunted down across the former empire. One notable figure escaped this purge, a young prince named Abd al-Rahman, who fled across North Africa and eventually reached Spain. There, in 756, he would establish a new Umayyad state in Córdoba, a remarkable postscript, and a story that deserves its own telling. The collapse of the Umayyad dynasty was not the result of a single battle, nor a single grievance. It was the product of decades of accumulated injustice, economic, political, and spiritual, that a rival family recognized, organized, and ultimately harnessed.